What's going on, guys? Hanging out here in the garage this evening, kind of going through the boat, drying it all out. We had a little bit of a wet weekend here this last weekend, opening weekend here in Wisconsin. So of course we went and chased some walleye, and then after we got our limits for the day or whatever, we went and chased some crappie as well. Caught an occasional northern mixed in there as well. But thought I'd kind of go over some of what the tactics we were doing and depths of water and how we had some rods set up, and just kind of give you guys a quick rundown on that. So first things first, we were targeting walleye. We found most of our walleye out deep yet. There was no weeds up yet. Just about everywhere we went. Little bit we found on a north shoreline, but just about everywhere there was no weeds. So everything was out a little deeper. Water was cooler. We had about 50-degree water temps. But main thing that was working for us, or the best thing that was working for us, was definitely slip bobber fishing. Whether it was for crappie or whether it was for walleye, just seemed to be producing the most for us. We tried plastics and rip and wraps and jerk baits and you name it. We were kind of using it all, but definitely live bait. Slow presentation, you know, nothing crazy, nothing erratic, seemed to be working best. We did get some on a rip and wraps, but not many. But so thought I'd kind of go over my bobber rod setup that I use. Definitely like a longer rod, 8 foot or better is my choice. Not all guys like that, but I like an 8 foot medium light. Gives you a little bit softer tip, gives you some backbone, so when you're setting the hook, you get a little more distance to make up that slack when you're setting the hook on a bobber rod and it's windy. It just seems like you get a little better hook set with that longer rod setup. So like I say, slip bobber. So obviously you have your knots back in the spool because I was fishing 20 feet of water. But then next you have your little bead, which every slip bobber has the same little bead. I don't know how well you're going to see that little guy. At any rate, there's a little bead. Then you have your bobber. Is a little bit bigger of a bobber. Most guys, especially for crappie, probably wouldn't fish this. And yeah, it was a little big. You didn't get the bite detection on the smaller fish, but that was fine. I mean, you're able to see the twitch of the bobber enough to realize you got to set the hook. But main reason we use a bigger bobber is because we also take an 1/8 ounce egg sinker and put that underneath our bobber. Slides on the line. So the reason behind that is it gives you a little more weight on your setup, so when you can cast it a lot further or cast it a lot smoother, you're not having to whip the bait out there so hard. It just gives you a little more accuracy. You can put the bait where you want it, and you're not just whipping it and whipping your bait off all the time. So egg sinker, then you just have a swivel. Nothing special for a swivel. I mean, again, this is one I just had in the box. It doesn't matter. And then you do a fluorocarbon after your swivel. I do 6 pound typically. Daiwa 6 pound seems to be what I've been going with the last couple years. Works good for me. I've got no complaints. Plus it comes on a fancy little spool that it doesn't come off. At any rate, after this, the fluorocarbon leader, we'll call it, not really a leader, but sure, a leader. You have your hook, 1/8 ounce hook, plain, unpainted, gold hook. I don't know why, but this has always been my go-to for walleye early season. The gold hook, the plain, unpainted jig, it's always produced the best for me. I've got buddies in the boat fishing painted jigs, and ultimately we all end up switching to this because that's what's working. I don't know, but so that's probably my go-to. That setup for slip bobber fishing is definitely working the best for me and working for the guys in the boat. Another setup that we do obviously is just straight jigging a minnow, jigging a leech, you name it. Same thing, use the same style jig, unpainted, gold hook, nothing fancy at all. I mean, spend all the money you want on fancy painted jigs, but ultimately this has been, for the last 10 years, this has been my favorite. It's actually, my grandpa made a jar of them, and I'll never run out of jigs in my entire life because I just kept those from him. But another setup that we like to do is what I would call a roach rig setup. Some guys would call it a variation of a Lindy rig, or they would just call it a Lindy rig, but we've always kind of called it a roach rig setup. It's a Northland tackle, 1/8 ounce Walker weight. I can try to grab that without making a big mess here. So you have your 1/8 ounce Northland tackle weight. It actually does clip on, the loop opens up and you can just clip it onto the line. I typically like to take another one of those little beads like you would for a slip knot or a slip bobber. I put the bead on and then I put the swivel. It just kind of gives that weight. So every once in a while, because I do use smaller swivels, you'll get that weight where it'll slide over and it's just obviously not where you want it. So I'll take that bead and I'll put it there just as a stop, basically. So here, again, fluorocarbon, 6 pound. Typically I'll make this about a foot and a half, 2 feet, kind of depending on what I'm doing, if I'm fishing over weeds or whatever, however, and rock or whatever. But this is a little longer than I typically would make, but I was trying something at the end of the day just to see if they were up a little higher. And then again, this is a Northland Tackle floating jig. This has been, I don't know, something that I've used for a long time, and I've caught some of my biggest walleye on this setup. It's a very slow presentation, perfect for early season. You can just drag it right along the bottom, leech or minnow on the floating jig. Definitely been a go-to for me. Like I say, caught a lot of my biggest walleye early season have come on that setup. And for a rod, I like to do something a little longer again as well, because you are fishing it off the bottom and you're kind of dragging it slow. Sometimes you'll get slack in the line. So I got another 8-foot rod for that as well. 8-foot Icons have kind of been what I've been going to for 8-foot rods. Been nice rods. I got no complaints with them. Again, another setup is just a typical jig that's been going good for us. Did do well on Rippin' Raps, not well, but did catch some on Rippin' Raps, so that worked as well. And for Rippin' Raps, medium light, 7-foot rod. Been using these 6-gill rods for the last couple of years for that kind of stuff. Those have been working pretty good for us as well. We got no complaints. So yeah, just kind of a rundown on some of what we were doing this weekend and what was working for us and should continue to work here for the next week or so. So, you know, if there's something that you guys got a question on and how I set something up, feel free to ask. If you got some input that say, hey, you know, this is what we do, maybe try this. Hey man, I'm more than willing to, I always like listening to other anglers and seeing the things that they do and comparing notes and seeing what's working. So, you know, for me, that's kind of part of the fun, you know, is what's working for you may not work for me, but, you know, vice versa. So at any rate, had a good weekend. Opening weekend was a success. Hope everybody else had a good weekend. And again, if you got any questions, comments, concerns, you let me know. Thanks.